Welcome back to another episode of Jump Ball, your new daily dose of NBA news and opinions. I'm your host, Sam Conrad, and today we're going to be talking about the most interesting, polarizing, and perplexing team in the NBA, which is the Golden State Warriors. Now, there's two, main reasons why this team is so perplexing. A, we don't know what to expect from them this season because they could potentially be a second or third seed in the Western Conference, or they could maybe slip down as far as, I'd say, sixth seed in the Western Conference this year. But the biggest reason of all is their sense of direction. Are they going to commit to winning now? Are they going to head towards a rebuild with some younger players? Are they just going to stay where they are and figure it out from there? That is all the stuff that we're going to be talking about in today's video. But I want to start with winning now. What reasons would this team go towards it? Why would they go towards a winning now direction? What would that look like? Stuff like that. So to start, they have only said that they would have traded during the draft picks number 7 and number 14 for Bradley Beal and Bradley Beal only, meaning that there's nobody else that's really interesting to them on the market. This has been the only true name that we've seen continuously be in trade talks with the Golden State Warriors. Yes, there was a period where Ben Simmons was rumored to go there, but those have quickly died out very, very quickly, to say the least. And it's certainly possible for them to trade for Bradley Beal. They have a ton of young assets. They still have a lot of draft capital. They have a lot of contracts that they can put with those young players to potentially match, of course, Bradley Beal's contract. There's a lot of possibilities for this team to make a trade for him, but then also for pretty much any other player, not any other player, but many other players in the NBA that they may find themselves needing at some point in the future. Right. On top of that, they made a lot of, I would say, win now decisions in free agency. But in all reality, these were just smart moves in general. Even if you are headed towards a rebuild, you would still probably be signing guys like this in order to remain somewhat competitive and in order to help your young guys learn a little bit from some other players and grow and progress, all that sort of stuff. But the three signings I'm talking about are Otto Porter Jr., Nemanja Bjelica, and Andre Iguodala, all on 1 year minimum veteran deals. These are three very valuable pieces, especially for the money that they brought them in on. Andre Iguodala, we already know what he can do. We saw him, obviously, I guess, in his quote unquote second prime. He was very good, obviously, in Philadelphia. But when he came to Golden State, obviously, those were some of his most memorable years. An excellent versatile defender for this team off of the bench. Nemanja Bjelica, excellent stretch forward for this team off of the bench. And Otto Porter Jr. could be a massive steal this season. We'll talk about him a little bit later, but overall, three very good signings that do look like, potential, win now moves. It's not exactly like they're saying, hey, we're winning now because we're signing three guys that are going to be bench pieces that aren't under the age of 25. No, but these are definitely moves that signify, hey, we're trying to make sure that we at least remain competitive and that we have a chance at a title shot if that opportunity comes along or presents itself this year, right? On top of that, they also had players emerge last season that could help them, especially win right now. One of them being Juan Toscano-Anderson, very good three-point shooting big man off of the bench, and also an excellent defender as well. He played some very good defense, and I think he's very underrated for that reason. I do want to say, though, 538's Raptor rating isn't exactly the most accurate. Sometimes they make players better or worse than they really truly are on either side of the ball, but this is a solid visualization of just how good this guy could be for them defensively, or at least was for them off of the bench last season. And another guy that I'm going to be talking about is Andrew Wiggins. I have been very down on Andrew Wiggins for the past a lot of years, to say the least. And I mean, yes, he's never going to be what we thought he could have potentially been coming out of the draft, but he played excellent defense last year. I mean, he's a big, strong, a long and strong guy with some great athleticism, all the capabilities or all the physical tools a great defender needs. And he finally put those tools to use this season. And on top of that, his efficiency was spectacular. I don't think he's going to average 38% from three next season, but 35 maybe is possible. And even if that's where he sits at next season at 35%, I'd be very happy with that as far as being a Golden State Warriors fan were to be, because as a third option on this team, or maybe even a second option, depending on a couple of other players that we'll talk about later, that's great. Overall, you really just need a guy that can get you a couple of buckets from three, play some very good defense, and can attack the basket relatively well. And that is exactly what Andrew Wiggins can do for this team. But now let's talk about the basically polar opposite of the spectrum, rebuilding. I mean, maybe not necessarily rebuilding, but yes, I think a rebuild is possible. Everybody talks about why don't they, what happens if they trade their young guys now? What if they trade their core three and head for a rebuild? Imagine the value you could get out of Steph Curry right now. Right? I mean, he had one of the best seasons of his career. He played phenomenal basketball last year. Klay Thompson, depending on how he comes back, of course, could be relatively valuable in the NBA. Maybe some people are really big fans of Draymond and they want him here on their roster and stuff like that. You could get a lot of pieces at some points in the future. Now, I don't expect this to happen because I mean, the Golden State Warriors and Steph Curry have a connection like this. And if Steph Curry isn't traded, I doubt the other two are, or at least especially Klay. Draymond, you never really know. But heading towards heading towards more of a younger direction is what I'm talking about here. I'm not saying that they're necessarily going to be rebuilding, but they're not quite as focused on winning now. And some of the moves that they've made that not necessarily are pointing at that direction, but are good signs of them potentially being able to shift towards that direction are the hiring of Kenny Atkinson. I've been waiting for somebody to hire Kenny Atkinson for such a long time. I've said New Orleans. I said I was even hoping my Pacers would potentially sign him. I said Oklahoma City. All of those teams especially should have been looking at him. I said the Bulls before they got Billy Donovan last year. All of those teams I thought should have potentially made a move for Kenny Atkinson because he, in my opinion, is an amazing, amazing coach, especially for teams with some young guys on the roster, such as obviously the Golden State Warriors. We saw what he did with that Brooklyn Nets team just not a year or two ago, 2 to 3 years ago. Phenomenal job helping build relationships with younger players, helping them develop as players overall, and kept the camaraderie with this team at a very high level. He played team basketball, true kind of grit and grind basketball that can really take a team that is subpar in talent and push them to borderline elite heights, at least, of course, for their talent capabilities. He alone is not going to take a bad team and make them a championship contender, but he raises the ceiling and the floor of the teams that he is a part of. And I love that about him. And I love the fact that he's going to be bringing those talents to the Golden State Warriors, especially considering the young talent that they've got. Now let's talk about the young talent that they've got, because overall, I think that people don't really realize with the additions of, the past two drafts, they now have more talent than we had ever really expected them to. Honestly, if you want to say three, because that's when Jordan Poole was drafted, I would say that too. Before 2019, they didn't really have any young talent on the roster. And granted, they didn't need to because they were the best team in the league, right? But since then, they've added Jordan Poole, James Wiseman, Moses Moody, and Jonathan Kuminga. Jordan Poole looks like a legitimate six-man of the year candidate, and I will talk about him a little bit later, so I'm just going to save that. James Wiseman and Jonathan Kuminga, two players that have been from day one extremely raw prospects. Bringing in a guy like Kenny Atkinson should help those guys develop and hopefully make sure that they're not super raw players that turn out to be busts and wastes of picks. And hopefully they turn out to be pretty good for this team. They have all the physical tools to be excellent, excellent players in this team with their raw athleticism, their incredible length and height, and also their overall basketball, not IQ, but basketball skills, right? They have the basic fundamentals down to be very successful players in the NBA. So overall, those two guys especially could be star level talents if all pieces fall into place. And Moses Moody, honestly, perfect for this team in a win now situation and in a rebuild situation. As a win now piece, you can just make him a 3-and-D wing, and he's going to be able to do an excellent job of doing that for you. He shoots the lights off. He shoots the skin off of the ball and plays some very solid defense as well. A pretty good, not like elite defender, but still a very formidable defender to say the least. And then he still has a little bit of potential to be more than just a 3-and-D wing in the future if you do want to commit to a rebuild or just going in a younger direction. I think he's got a little bit more potential finishing around the rim, a little bit more potential creating for himself, because while he has worked mostly off ball in the summer league and honestly through a little bit of college, we did see a lot of opportunities for him in college where he was able to create for himself. And those abilities could potentially be brought out of him in the NBA. Right. So overall, those are, I guess, the two main directions for this team to potentially go in. But hang on, just let me close out of some of these tabs. But there is a third direction that this team goes in. They don't do anything. This team sticks with their current core and they just go from there. right? So they could win now, they could trade away and start a rebuild, or they can keep their current core and develop good young talent. Basically repeating what the Spurs did back however many years ago. They had David Robinson, then they managed to land Tim Duncan in the draft, and then they went from there. They didn't commit to trying to win immediately after Tim Duncan was drafted, trading him away for a win now star or anything like that. He played very well early on. They won a championship, and they didn't win for a while. He develops into a star. They start to bring in some pieces over time through the draft, get a couple of steals, land a relatively high lottery pick one year, you get Kawhi Leonard, then you win 4 more rings, and you're considered a dynasty in the NBA. The Warriors could do something very similar here. They have Steph Curry nearing the end of his prime. You focus on developing the young talent over the course of the next 2 to 3 seasons, because Steph Curry will definitely translate. His game will definitely translate as he gets older. He's not a freakishly athletic player that is going to be losing a lot of his ability as he gets older and slower, and his reaction time worsens and all of that sort of stuff. He's an excellent shooter that runs very well in the court. And his ankle injuries have, of course, been lessening as time goes on throughout his career. So he should still be very good. Maybe not the best player in the league or capable of being the best player in the league, but at least should be a very good player for this team while they let's say, Jonathan Kuminga, James Wiseman develop into potential stars. Moses Moody becomes an excellent second or third option not off the bench, but on this team. Stuff like that could potentially maybe win them a championship in a really good situation. Then they let Steph Curry go. They let Draymond go. They let Klay go. And all of that knowledge from those players translates to the younger talent, and that younger talent stays as a core, wins a couple of rings, and you're happy, right? There's a lot of possibilities for this team, and honestly, all 3 of them I think could turn out very well for this team. I don't think that there's a bad situation whatsoever that the Golden State Warriors can choose, but there are a lot of X factors that could determine which direction that they choose to go in. So let's start off with Klay Thompson, easily the biggest elephant in the room right now. He will probably not be returning until Christmas. And even then, how well will he be when he returns, right? Suffering both, and I think an Achilles injury and then an ACL injury on both legs, or was it the same leg? I think it might have been the same leg. I'm not completely sure. Is not good for any player. I understand he's not a crazy athletic guy like, let's say, John Wall was a couple of years ago, but it's going to make him worse, in my opinion, regardless. There's no way he returns the same. However, I guess it kind of is a question of how much worse does he get. I think he honestly may have his best shooting season ever, which is crazy to say considering that he is a top 5 shooter probably of all time. I think he's going to have probably his best shooting season ever, because the only thing that he's been able to do while he's been off of the bench or off of the court has been shooting. His dad has said so himself. His shot looks a lot better because of the amount of shots he's been getting up in practices. That's all he can do because of his leg. So he's just shooting all the time. And after a while, even if you are already a great shooter, the more shots you take, the more of them you'll probably make. So I think he could be a very good shooter, but his defense may worsen a little bit. Now, that may not be too big of a deal because this team has a lot of really good 3-and-D wings. They have Juan Toscano Anderson. They brought in Andre Iguodala. They may still have Draymond Green as a pretty solid defender. They may have Moses Moody come in as a pretty good defender. They still have Andrew Wiggins, right? Overall, 4 pretty good defenders in and of themselves. I feel like I'm forgetting somebody still off of the bench. I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about that. But overall, they may have enough guys to kind of cover up his bad defense. But overall, it's still a very big question for them to answer. Another question is James Wiseman's development, because not only is his development important for the future, but it's important right now. By far, the biggest hole for this team position-wise is their center position. Either James Wiseman is good or they have an average center at the 5, right? Because after him, it's just like Kevon Looney, right? Who's not terrible. He's solid, but he's not a great center like James Wiseman, we hope, could be. And last season, there were a lot of red flags. We knew he would be raw from the start, but it definitely wasn't a good sign. He got benched at one point throughout the season. He got injured, and I believe he also at one point caught the virus. I'm not honestly sure about that last part, but I believe it sounds familiar. And what Steve Kerr had to say about benching him was, I'm not going to go into detail, but this is all part of development. As a young player, you have to take care of your business. Everything matters. This was the reaction to missing the test and not being able to practice last night. That hurt us. But here's the most important part to me. Kerr opted to continue starting Kevon Looney because it's proven to be a more successful and efficient lineup. If Wiseman can not finally, it's only been 1 year, but if Wiseman next year can really step it up as a good defender and as a solid 3-point shooter or just a solid offensive threat, that's great for this team and for his development because I think excuse me, I have an alarm going off. Jesus, that scared me. I think that's great for his development and great for this team because it means that hopefully he's better than Kevon Looney. He can prove to be a very efficient and effective piece for them. And B, it means that he's at least headed towards a positive trajectory for his career because a lot of times last year we saw him making mistakes. A lot of the veterans and the coaches were talking to him, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that, you got to change your decision-making because that is by far your biggest weakness right now. And we saw that come up a lot last year. Third overall is Moses Moody and Kuminga. Because while, yes, they looked great in the summer league, how well will they translate to the regular NBA season with guys like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, all on their roster? Because in the summer league, you're not playing with a full NBA team. You're playing with a lot of guys that are young, a lot of guys that haven't played in the NBA for a while, and a lot of guys that won't be getting any real NBA minutes. You're going to be in a new role. This is mainly towards Jonathan Kuminga, not as much Moses Moody, but we'll talk about him too. Jonathan Kuminga had the ball in his hands a lot during the summer league. A lot. And I think he'll be getting the ball a good amount during the NBA season as well, because both Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, they work well off ball. Andrew Wiggins was getting a lot of off ball opportunities last year as well, but he's still going to be in a different role. And how well will he be able to do that? Will he be able to work well off ball? Right? Will he be effective shooting a mid-range shot if that's what he has to take? Will he be effective shooting a 3-point shot in a catch and shoot situation if that's what he has to take? We haven't really seen that yet. And on top of that, both of these guys were not facing NBA caliber talent. Never, ever, ever take stats from the summer league too seriously. That includes second-year players because everybody is playing against guys that will barely make an NBA team or won't make an NBA team whatsoever. Guys that will barely get minutes in the NBA or won't get any NBA minutes whatsoever. So, of course, they're going to look great because they're playing against guys that not necessarily they're scrubs because they'd all kill me in, let's say, a 5-on-5 matchup, but they're not that good in comparison to NBA players as a whole. So we can't get too overhyped about these guys. And we have to understand that not only are they going to be playing against a different level of talent, but they most likely will also be put into a different role as well. Then two other guys I want to talk about were going to be Otto Porter Jr. and then Jordan Poole. Otto Porter Jr., as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, could be a massive, 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 massive steal of a contract for this team. Very long and athletic guy who, when he was healthy, was very good. And especially considering that he's now on a 1-year minimum vet deal, that could be a steal of a contract for the production that we have seen out of him in the past. His last really healthy season was, let's say, when he was 24, the 2017 through 18 season. The rest of these times, he played 56 games the next year. Then he played 14 games the year after that. Then he played 28 games last year. 3 very unhealthy seasons, which is not great, right? But honestly, it's not that big of a deal for this team because he barely took up any salary cap this season. It is a 1-year minimum vet deal. But if he does stay healthy, the value that you will receive from him is insane. He is an excellent defender, excellent 3-point shooter, and overall can shoot threes in volume. This is not a guy like, let's say, one of my favorite players, Patrick Williams, who shot borderline 40% from the 3-point line, but only took 2 shots a game. This is a guy that has commonly taken 4 threes a game, 5 threes a game, and has been very efficient when doing so. He could be a massive steal for this team. And if he's coming off of the bench, those skills will be utilized more, and B, he'll probably be at less of a risk for getting injured because he'll be on the court less. And he may be playing a little bit of a slower paced style of basketball because, once again, a lot of times your bench pieces aren't quite as fast or quite as skilled as your starting units, right? And the final guy I want to talk about is Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole could potentially be a legitimate 6th man of the year candidate next season. I don't think he wins it, but considering that he continues to improve, considering that he may have been getting a lot of tips from Steph Curry over the course of the offseason, and considering that they did bring in Kenny Atkinson, we saw a nice jump from him last year, especially in his efficiency. If he can keep up these sort of numbers, he's going to be getting more minutes. I wouldn't be shocked to see him get like 25 minutes a game next season. He could come out and legitimately average like 15 to 16 points a game, if not a little bit more, on very good efficiency. Now, he won't do much else for you. I'm not going to lie, but he could be an excellent scoring spark plug off the bench. And I really, really love that. Now, at the same time, everything I just mentioned, none of that could happen. Literally, none of that could happen. And this team could be a complete bust next season. And that completely changes the landscape of their overall direction as a franchise. So that's everything that you have to know about this team as a fan of the Warriors and as a fan of the NBA. Overall, I have zero predictions for what this team is going to do. I have no clue how any of their young guys are going to develop, how Klay Thompson will return, how Otto Porter Jr. will look. I don't have any idea about any of that, and I have no idea what they're going to be doing the rest of this offseason and throughout the rest of the beginning of next year. This team could potentially be a top 3 seed in the Western Conference or potentially be a 6 seed in the Western Conference. We don't really know, but what we do know is they are an extremely perplexing, polarizing, and interesting team. And I'm very excited to see what they do over the course of the next, let's say, 3 off seasons, because that will determine what direction this team is going to choose to go in for the next decade and a half. Anyways, that's all I had for you guys today. I do hope you enjoyed this episode of Jump Ball. Thank you very much, and I will see you guys again tomorrow. Thank you very much.